Hello, my fellow comic book collectors. Today is Thursday and part 2 of my Q&A. So it's kind of funny. I went last week with just one question where only one person asked me a question. This week I got like over 20 questions and it's just a lot of questions, so I had to break up the video into 2 parts. I recommend you watch yesterday's video as well, because in it I answer some really great questions and it's worth watching. So check out yesterday's video, which is part 1. And for part 2, I'll get right into the questions right now. And I'll start with Troy Percy. So Troy Percy asked me a 2-part question. I answered his first part in last week's video, or yesterday's video, I should say. And I'm going to answer part 2 in this video. So part 2 is, what is your best Disney comic in your collection? Thanks. And that's actually pretty easy. So most Disney comics, strangely enough, are not that expensive. It's amazing how you can buy like Golden Age Disney comics for like $10. Really inexpensive. There are a few key issues. And if you watch my unboxing, I did an unboxing where I basically show a whole bunch of comics that I got from one collection, where the guy just had amazing books. And I show a bunch of the big keys for Disney. So there are some expensive books, and I pretty much picked most of them up in that collection. It was pretty amazing. But one of the books that I picked up in that collection is possibly my best, I would say it is my best Walt Disney comic. And it's Walt Disney Comics #1. And this is not a complete copy. It's actually missing the last couple of pages. And you can see it's also got some damage going on right there. And it's in rough shape. So this would be a 0.5 grade because it is incomplete. But even in a 0.5 grade, where it has the cover and it's complete otherwise, it can command some big money. So I saw a coverless copy of the same thing at discount, where they were actually discounting it for $1,000. So I figure that this book is in around that $2,000 to $3,000 range, even in this grade. So that just shows you how expensive it is. And this is kind of a cool Disney comic. Like, it's not only is it Walt Disney Comics #1, which is cool in itself, but it's also the first time that we see Daisy in comics. And she's not actually called Daisy. That's the funny thing. So on my Instagram, if you go to my Instagram account, I actually post this comic, and then the next day I actually post the insert from this comic where you actually see Daisy for the very first time. And when they post Daisy in this comic, they call her Donna. So it's kind of weird. It's obviously Daisy, you can see, and you'll see if you see the Instagram picture. It's obviously Daisy, but they call her Donna. So that's just a little bit of cool trivia about this book and about the early appearance of Daisy Duck. So I believe this is from 1941. It doesn't say, but it's, so it's early Walt Disney comic. And it's just a really great one. I also have the very first Donald Duck comic, and that's another great one that's in my collection. But it is not an expensive comic. It is not like, it's not as pricey as this one. So this is kind of one of those big ones. I feel like I should almost show one other thing. And one of the things that I never do, just so you know a little bit about my channel, is I don't edit my videos. So you see me raw. This is like, one take, pure action. You get to see me for who I am, and, flaws and all. Like, half the time I'm forgetting the names of characters and stuff like that, even though I really know them. So yeah, so I want to show something and I have to grab it, and it's literally right there. So again, I have to grab it. I feel like, why didn't I bring this? Why didn't I bring it over? I should have brought it over, but I didn't bring it over. And so now I have to grab it. So I'm going to quickly grab it. I can't pause the video, But you're going to enjoy this. I think it's a cool book, and I just wanted to show it. It's Disney related. So I really wanted to show this. This is a really cool book that I really wanted to show, and it is a early Disney book. So this is Disney Mickey Mouse Annual 1. And actually, I've shown this book before. It's just a really great book. You can see. Look at the artwork. I mean, it's just so great. Now, this book is actually, I showed it before because it is a controversial book, and it is sadly controversial. So back in the day, language has changed over the years, okay? And things were not, like, certain words, like the N word, which is used a lot in this book, a lot, were not considered bad at the time. It was a very different time. It was not seen as the big insult that we see nowadays, where people would get really offended and freak out about it. Back then, it was not considered that bad. This is back in the 30s, okay? So things changed, words change over time, and people, change the meaning of it. So it is one of those things. Now it's considered a major insult. Back then, not so much. So a lot of people, when they read this book, they're like, oh my goodness, that they say the N word and a lot, like a lot. It was not seen as a bad thing, but it's kind of a cool book, and it's just a really early Mickey Mouse book, and just interesting. So very interesting book. And the cool thing about this book, it's not that many pages. It looks like a lot of pages, but each page is really thick. Like, they're really thick pages. And I'll show you, just you can see all the, but it's like really thick, like almost like each page is like the pages themselves are like really thick. Just a really great book. Highly recommend this one. Very rare. And it's another great Disney book that I have in my collection, that I like it partly because of the controversy, partly because it is early Mickey Mouse. I'm a big Disney fan, so I just wanted to show that one. Okay, so that's that question. I hope that was fun and interesting. Next question comes from my good friend Kiwi. Kiwi says, great video. Here's my question. If you create a hero or villain, which powers would he or she have? So I always think about this kind of situation where, what if I was given the option of having superpowers myself? So a lot of the times when writers or creators create characters, they really base it off them, either themselves or off of people in their lives. And I think if I was going to create a character, I would create a character based on myself. So it'd be a he. And it would be a character who has the power to control time. I've always been obsessed with the idea of controlling time. I like the idea of living forever, all that kind of stuff. And I like the idea of, because I make so many mistakes, I'd like to I like to have the ability to rewind and, say, oh crap, I made a mistake. Let's rewind and I'll try that again, and I won't make that same mistake. So I always like that ability to control time. So the closest to that is like Doctor Strange and his green time stone that he has, Infinity Stone, where you can control time. That's why actually the whole fight between him and Thanos, I thought he should just win. Just rewind. Oh, we made a mistake. Let's rewind, fix it. So, it's like, to me, that's like the most powerful thing you can do. If you have the ability to just rewind anytime you make a mistake, you can live a flawless life. So I always like that. And I also like the idea of stopping time. one of the things that you have, if you have the ability to stop time, like, so controlling of time is the big theme within my superhero powers. If you have the ability to stop time, you could basically act like the Flash or any of those fast characters, because you could have the ability to just basically stop time, run over or walk over to wherever you need to go, and then restart time, and then you just magically appear. That's faster than the Flash. It's not like you're, you know, having to run or do anything special. You can just literally stop time and move to another place, and it would appear like teleporting. It would be like kind of cool. So I believe that time manipulation is like the most powerful of the superpowers. Um, yeah, so I always liked that as a concept. There's actually, just as an aside, I've always wanted to write, and I have written several books, but I always wanted to write a comic series. And I kind of wanted to talk about this. And like, this is good segue in order to me to talk about my comic thing that I always wanted to create. So if there's anyone watching this that's an artist, wants to collaborate and make a comic, I would be down for it. And here's my idea, and I'm going to put this out as a pitch. One of the things that I was always interested in was superheroes, but I always felt like superheroes have to have like some kind of like balance to their thing. So, for example, Superman, his balance is kryptonite. So, you know, he got all these powers, but he also has a great weakness. And I always felt like characters should have that balance. So I came up with the concept of cursed characters. Characters that have superpowers, but are cursed by those same superpowers. And in my story, it's basically like I've written all the story. It's basically a bunch of characters who have these curses in their lives. So one of the characters is a time-related character, so that's why I'm mentioning time. And basically what happens is there's this guy who's obsessed with the ability to control time. And the ability to not control time in the way that I originally stated, but more control his time, his life, and not have to worry about ending his life ending. And in the story that I wrote, he basically is a scientist. He's like trying to figure out how to manipulate time, and in doing so, he has that traumatic accident. They always have an accident in comic books, so I figured, hey, I'll stick with that trope and put it as an accident in my comic. And basically the accident, he gets his wish of being basically immortal, but in doing so, he believes that he has stopped time. He has basically, it looks like for him that time has stopped. And it's just that what has happened is that he's removed himself from our timeline. And he's basically, he can still see our timeline, but he's moving very, very, he's moving at a different rate than our timeline. So our timeline is moving so slowly, it's almost imperceivable. And it's actually, in my story, it takes him a while to actually realize that things aren't stopped. It's not, time hasn't stopped. It's just moving so slowly that he he basically is watching, it's like watching paint dry, watching these people move around because people are moving just so slowly. And he has a problem actually even dealing with this new situation that he's in, where he is basically in a world of people moving like snails. and he has to figure out how to basically interact with these very slow moving people. And that's his curse, that he is in a way super powerful, just as I was describing. He can just walk across the street and it looks like he teleported across the street because he's moving that much faster than everyone else. And it's just because he's in a different time stream. So it's a story that I kind of came up with, and I have like a bunch of characters like that. They're all cursed by their superpowers. Their superpowers actually are their curses. And then I have a series of characters that are blessed. They have these blessings, and the blessings actually act as the opposite. So it's basically the heroes are the cursed ones, and the villains kind of are the blessed ones. And it's kind of an interesting story that I wrote, and I just never got around to putting it in a comic. But it's something that I really would love to collaborate with. So I know that's been a very long-winded answer, but it was just an opportunity for me to tell my story about this cursed character. And it's a really cool, there's a lot more to the story. If you ever want, if you ask me in the questions below, if you want to hear more of my stories, I actually can go really into detail about the story. It's a fun story. Okay, so that's the answer to that question, I guess. Okay, the next question is from the Phantom. And do you have any favorite old school Pulp Fiction heroes like the Shadow from the 30s and 40s? Okay, so Pulp magazines actually, a lot of people don't realize this. So before comic books, there were pulps. So pulps were these thick books that were like very poor quality, paper quality, and were mainly text. They didn't have very much art in them, very little amount of art in them, and they told pretty cool stories, and that's what people read. And actually, one of the reasons people kind of reacted negatively to comics was they thought, oh, comics, it's like it's for kids in a way because it's so much more picture based rather than text based. And it's like, oh, people didn't like the fact that the reading skills would go down because they didn't have to read as much to get the story. And there was a little bit of backlash about that, especially from people that enjoyed pulps. And pulps actually really went up into the 60s. There's not many pulps nowadays, but that was kind of the generations from I would say from the actually early 19th century all the way up into the 60s. And one of the earliest pulps and one of the earliest pulp characters was Tarzan. And Tarzan made his first appearance in All Story from 1912, like October 1912. And that was one of the earliest pulp characters. So these are Platinum Age characters. And I grew up in the 70s and 80s. And I don't know why, but Tarzan was huge. I had so many like Tarzan related like books and toys and stuff. I was really into Tarzan as a young kid, like 6 age. I really liked Tarzan. And one of the things we'd always do is tell Tarzan jokes. So I really like Tarzan. So one of my pulp characters that I really like is Tarzan. Another character that I only recently learned about is Domino Lady. That's another pulp character. They actually brought the character back. And she was kind of in a lot of these spicy detective stories. So she's a bit of a sexy character. Another one that I liked is Sally the Sleuth. And I actually brought some Sally the Sleuths just to show. So Sally the Sleuth made her first comic appearance in Crime Smashers from the Golden Age. And this is Crime Smashers number 2. Now, Crime Smashers number 1, she doesn't make a cover appearance, but this is her on the cover. I'll zoom in so you can see. That's her. And in the Platinum Age, in the pulps, she was kind of a very sexy character. She wouldn't wear this much clothing. She would wear kind of almost like the most flimsy of clothing that would always seem to fall off her. So a very sexy character from the Golden Age, from the Platinum Age. And in the Golden Age, they kind of made her a little bit less sexy. So this is her in the Golden Age and her first cover appearance. And I actually bought an anthology of her pulp books. So this is it here. And you can see what she's wearing. As I said, it's much more skimpy. Like you can see, like you can actually almost requiring some finger censoring. This is what she would have looked like in the pulps. So in the pulps, as I said, the pulps really didn't have much artwork in them, but Sally the Sleuth, actually they showed as almost like a comic strip inside of the pulps. And she appeared in the pulp called Spicy Detective Stories. And she basically, her pulp series ran from 1934 to 1953. Says it right there. Okay, so Sally the Sleuth, a character I really like. Just crazy stuff that happens with this character. So I kind of enjoy that quirky, kind of campy characters. So that's another one. One that I actually heard is considered one of the first hero characters in pulps, and maybe of all time, is Dr. Savage. I haven't confirmed that. I've been checking and see if that's actually true, but I heard it was written somewhere when I was researching this that Doc Savage is one of the earliest heroes. Um, so Doc Savage. Another character that made his first appearance in pulps is Conan the Barbarian. So a lot of people think of Conan the Barbarian, and we think of him appearing in the magazines and then later in comics. Well, he actually made his first appearance in pulps, and he made his first appearance in Weird Tales, which is kind of a cool pulp actually, from December of 1932. And another pulp character is Miss Fury. I actually have Miss Fury. I'm not sure. No, you won't be able to see it on this video, but I have her up there. And so she made her first appearance in the pulps in the 30s, and then later in comics in the 40s. And then we got another great character that appeared in the pulps was Buck Rogers. I was a big Buck Rogers fan when I was a kid. I had all the model kits to make like Buck Rogers things and like the little spaceships and stuff. I was a big Buck Rogers fan. And Buck Rogers came from the pulps. So sadly, a lot of these pulp books are very inexpensive. Sadly and good, actually, I kind of like the fact that they're inexpensive, because if you pick, you can pick them up for like under $50, and it can be like from the 30s and just kind of a cool book. Usually they're in pretty low grade because it's hard to maintain the pulps because they're generally printed on very poor paper. The reason they're called pulps is because the paper quality was pulp paper, and it's just like this really flimsy paper that just disintegrates over time. And maybe that's another reason why people don't often collect them, because they're generally in pretty poor shape. But there's a lot of great stuff that came out of the pulps, and you can pick up some really cool pulps. Now, the Spicy Detectives that I mentioned earlier, those are actually pretty expensive. They're in the $200-300 range and up, like depending on the grade, but they're fairly expensive. And they're ones that I'm trying to pick up actually, because I do enjoy Sally the Sleuth. Okay, so that's a little bit about pulps, and I hope that was interesting. Next question comes from Pop Comics. Pop Comics, actually, I have to kind of give him an extra little shout out. He's one of the guys that inspired me to create this channel in general. Him, and there was a few other channels that kind of inspired me. And because I was like really liking his style, because he would do these like unboxing videos, and he would just like show a whole bunch of stuff. So if you watch my unboxing videos, it's based on his style, where he basically, shows like 1,000 books, not quite that many, but he'll show like a really long video of him unboxing a lot of stuff. And I thought, hey, that's pretty cool. And I get a lot of comics, so I could do the same. So I kind of felt like he was a bit of my inspiration on that. So Pop Comics, definitely check him out. So Pop Comics wrote, do you have any golden or silver age comics that were Canadian only release? And the answer is no. So sadly, no. I wish I did, but I don't. But this question kind of makes me think about something that I kind of want to get into the history of, because I love history, and I kind of want to tell you a little bit about something that is kind of cool about Canadian comic history. And I want to tell you about the Canadian Whites. And I've done videos before about the Canadian Whites. The Canadian Whites were books that came out from 1941 to 1947. And they were basically, what happened was there was the War Exchange Conservation Act. And the War Exchange Conservation Act basically said that it was basically like a shipping embargo from Canada and the United States, where all of a sudden all the comics that were produced in the United States could not be sent to Canada. So what ended up happening was Canadians still wanted to read comics, but they had nothing to read. No new books, at least, because there was that shipping embargo. So what happened was Canadian publishers like Bell Features and Maple Leaf started producing comics locally. And, we're producing, and there were also reprints. Actually, I have Venus #2, which is a Canadian Maple Leaf. But that I felt like that's not exclusive. So, but the Canadian Whites were for the most part exclusives, where they would produce Canadian characters in Canada. So you get like Canadian characters like Nelvala of the Northern Lights, and she was actually considered one of the first female superheroes. So Fatima is the #1 first female superhero, and she actually appeared in Jungle Comics #2. But Nelvala actually was the second. It was the next female superhero before Wonder Woman. So Nelvana came out in August of 1941. Wonder Woman came out December of 1941. So a few months before, we had the Canadian one, then Superwoman. Wonder Woman. Oh, jeez. Okay, Wonder Woman. So the point is, it's kind of cool. Another Canadian character was Johnny Canuck. Then we have Brock Winsner. And then Canada Jack. And a lot of these characters were produced in a comic series called Triumph Comics, and they're quite hard to find. That's probably why I don't have any in my collection. It's not that I haven't searched for them. It's really hard to get these books. They're really rare. And the reason they were called Canadian Whites, and that's the name for them, is they were printed on this black and white paper. So black ink and white paper, which was very different than most comics. Comics are usually different type of paper. But the Canadian paper was white. So it would have like a much different feel to it than the American comics. Now, the reason the Canadian Whites kind of ended, so as I said, it ran from 1941 to 1947, was after the war ended, the embargo was ended as well, and all of a sudden you got this influx of American comics, and it just, after a while, it kind of killed the Canadian market. Canadians are not really good at supporting Canadian things. It's very different than the Americans. So, we kind of will gravitate to the American things over our own Canadian stuff. So it's kind of sad they kind of disappeared. Every so often, they try to bring back some of these Canadian characters. But that's a little bit of Canadian history. Okay, next question is from Ronald Walton. My question is this: what Batman comic did Penguin, the Penguin bad guy, make his first appearance? And this is Ron that asked this. He's from Melbourne, Florida. And, well, that's a very easy question to answer. He actually made his first appearance in Detective Comics 58 from December of 1941. So that's the first time Penguin was in comics. Now, he was not on the cover of his first appearance. He made his first cover appearance in issue 67. So 58 is his first appearance, and 67 in Detective Comics is his first cover appearance. Now, his first appearance in Batman was in number 11, Batman 11, and which was June of 1942. So a few, like almost 6 months, 7 months after he first appeared in Detective Comics. He appeared in Batman 11. And then his first cover appearance in Batman's title was in number 14. Okay, so if you like collecting Penguin, those are all the key issues. Now, a lot of people cannot afford those key issues because they're pretty expensive. So I want to show you another book. If you're interested in the Penguin, I like the Penguin a lot. I want to show you his first Silver Age appearance. And it just happens to kind of fit a couple things because it is not only his first Silver Age appearance, but is his first Silver Age cover appearance. And this is Batman 155. Just a great comic. I like the dragon. I'm a big Dungeons and Dragons kind of guy, so I like the dragon. And this is the first Silver Age appearance of the Penguin, and it's also a Vicky Vale appearance. And if you watch yesterday's video, I talk a lot about Vicky Vale. So, so this is a really cool comic. And this one is much more affordable than his Golden Age appearances. So if you're into collecting Joker, I recommend that one. Okay, so that was that question. And now the last question is from, this is going to be a bit of a controversial one, is from Thunder God. And we actually had a little bit of a thread going. If you go to the last week's video, you can read what we were writing to each other. Thunder God kind of took reaction to what I said about the Batman movie. So I'll read what he wrote. Wait. You enjoy political dynamic of the show, but complain about the so-called woke aspect, which is political, of Batman. As though being woke is a bad thing. Yeah, no, that doesn't jibe. Okay, so one of the things that people don't realize, and I kind of want to explain this. This is going to be the controversial part of this video. And if you're not into the controversy, stop now. Just leave. Because whenever I do anything that's controversial where I kind of talk about woke culture, that's when I lose subscribers. So please don't unsubscribe. Don't unsubscribe to me just because you disagree with me. Just hear me out and bear with me. You don't have to agree with me. I'm not forcing my opinion on anybody. I'm just telling you what my opinion is. And if you don't agree with me, fine. We can still be friends. I don't force my opinion on others, but I want to give you my opinion. And my opinion is this: I love politics. If whenever there's an election, I get really into it. I like learning about elections. I like learning about policies that they're going to put in play. But none of this has to do with wokeness. What has happened in recent years is politics and woke culture have kind of gotten mixed together, where a lot of the politics is identity politics. And I don't like that. I don't think that identity has anything to do with politics, or shouldn't have anything to do with politics. I take the Martin Luther King approach to it, where I believe that we should be colorblind about certain issues. That we shouldn't base our decision on people's race or gender or whatever. We should just base it on what is best for the country as a whole. So, and I'll give you an example of that. Like when you think of economic policy, you should make economic policy that benefits the country and not based on like special interest groups. A lot of the policy that's coming out nowadays in politics has been sort of co-opted by these very left-wing woke kind of people who basically see politics as a way to push some identity narrative, and they push it in And so what happens is you get government policy where it's basically racist, where they'll create like in Canada, like the Trudeau government actually created a policy where only only black owned businesses could get some special grant. And to me, that's racist. I don't believe in special privileges for any group. And I really don't like when governments throw out money anyways. So I believe less is more when it comes to government. The less government, the better it is for us all. So generally, I don't like that. And one thing I want to explain is that woke is a bad thing. Wokeism is bad. And I'll explain that. Actually, I wrote down, let's see if I can find it. Oh, I actually wrote down the definition of woke. And I'll show you why I think it's a bad thing. Okay, woke. According to Google, so this was me Googling what is the definition of woke. So this is Google's definition and not my definition, Google's definition. Okay, alert to the injustice in society, especially racism. So to be woke, basically you are awake to the injustices in society. Okay, now that sounds great. From the basic level, that sounds great. Like, oh, you're aware that, oh, there's injustice in society, and if you're aware about injustice, then you can maybe solve that injustice. Sounds good. However, where this actually originates from is another another philosophy, and it originates from Marxism. And the way Marxism defined injustice was through the dialectic of the capitalists and the worker class. And what woke culture had done is, instead of taking it as being the capitalists and the working class, they took it between two different groups. They said, oh, white people and black people. And basically they said the white people are the oppressors and the black people are the oppressed. And that is a horrible philosophy. That is just a horrible philosophy, because basically it's making two very negative assumptions. One, it's assuming that white people are going around trying to oppress everyone else. Not true. White people don't, we don't care. For the most part, white people don't care about oppressing anyone else. We want everybody to do well. We want, and I'm saying this not just as a white person, but I'm saying this as just a person that makes the common observation about our society that most people, we just want to live and let live. We don't really care about, we want to see everyone do well. And we don't care about hurting other people. That's not something we have any intent to do. And so the narrative that woke culture embraces is this dynamic of oppressors and oppressed. And that's the biggest flaw within woke culture, and that's why it's so evil. So first of all, it has demonized a whole entire population just for their color of their skin. For being white, you are instantly an oppressor. And that's a horrible, horrible, horrible philosophy. The second part of it is it also is racist to the other group. So the other group being black people or people of color, because they kind of want to make it intersectional. Or sometimes they'll throw, because of intersectionality, they kind of bring in other oppressed groups like women, the disabled, gays and lesbians, and trans and all that kind of stuff. They bring them all into another group as oppressed. And I think that's a horrible philosophy. Just because you're any of those things doesn't make you oppressed. Just by the sheer nature of your skin, to be considered oppressed is horrible. Like, I live in a very affluent neighborhood, and some of my neighbors are black, and friends. We're very good friends. And I would, if somebody called them oppressed, I'd be like, Really? You're oppressed? They're living like in a like $2 to $3 million home. I don't think they're very oppressed, and they generally do very well for themselves. And if you called them oppressed, they'd probably say, "What?" They'd be really confused by it. So just to that sheer racism of assuming that somebody is oppressed just by the sheer nature of their skin color, I think is horribly racist, horribly misguided. So this is the kind of the fundamental kind of nature of woke culture, that they have this kind of oppressor oppressed narrative. First of all, it's in a power dynamic as well. Marx loved his power dynamics, and the woke people that kind of leveraged Marx's philosophy have that same power dynamic in their philosophy. And it's not based on reality. And what ends up happening is when you push this woke culture, you make one group feel like ashamed. Like you make white people, generally white straight males especially, ashamed for being what they are born as. And then you make other group also feel ashamed for what they were born as. And it's very divisive, and it just creates the very problems that we see in our society. So often what ends up happening is they they push things like equity, and it's like, it just doesn't understand the realities of our society. And they push a lot of things that really bother me, like the identity politics is just so horrible, where it pushes things where what ends up happening is they just push things that are not true. For example, and this is going to be, as I said, this is the controversial part. So take that. Just listen to what I'm saying. I'm going to tell you a little bit about George Floyd. Okay, and I think this is a great example of woke culture and the negative impacts of woke culture. So, George Floyd, very famous case, and it is a case that has been cited as racism. Now, it didn't matter that the cop, if you read the actual Michigan handbook for police, he followed the guidelines exactly, like 100%. Like I read the book. They actually removed it from the internet actually afterwards in order to kind of, because of all this pressure, because he followed the guidelines. He did exactly, like to a T, what you're supposed to do when dealing with the George Floyd situation. So I'm going to tell you the George Floyd story. So what happened was, George Floyd, he is a thug. First of all, I have to kind of poison the well a little bit about his character. He had a criminal record. He actually threatened a pregnant woman with a gun at gunpoint for money so that he could buy drugs. He was not a good person. And one of the things about being not a good person is you do bad things. So he had counterfeit money, okay? And he went to a local convenience store and he tried to buy something with that counterfeit money. And the shop owner was like, "Hey, this is counterfeit. I cannot accept it. Just give me some real cash and we won't even bring this up. This won't become an issue." George Floyd refused. He just walked away. And so the shop owner is like, this is going to come out of my money. I'm not a rich man. I need, the shop guy is like, "Hey, he's just an employee." So he called the police. He said, "Hey, this guy just shortchanged me basically. Can you come and help me out?" So the police come, and George Floyd actually didn't even walk very far. He just walked over to his car and he was sitting in his car, and the police come over. Now, George Floyd freaked out. He had a whole bunch of drugs in his car. And he basically took those drugs and he ate them to try to dispose of the evidence. And he's with his girlfriend at the time. And so the cop knocks on his door, and he gets out, and they have a discussion. And it's obvious that George Floyd has been taking something. He's under the influence of something. So they sort of take him over and they sit him down and they say, hey, look, this is a situation. This is a crime that you've committed, and they have a very reasonable discussion with him. And they said, we're going to have to take you now to our police car, which was parked across the street, and you're going to have to go down to the station for questioning. And they try to put George Floyd into the police car. George Floyd, just so you know, he's I think he's like 6'2", 6'3". He's a tall guy, big guy. So they're trying to put him into this police car, and he is resisting, very much so. But he's resisting in a way that's not like violent. I wouldn't say he's like being violent in the way he's resisting, but he is resisting in a way that he's saying, hey, look, I don't want to get into the police car. I'm claustrophobic. Please just take me to the ground. And he actually says this multiple times where he says, please take me to the ground. And they say, hey, look, we'll roll down the windows. We'll do everything for you. Don't worry. It's a short ride to the police station. Things will be fine. And he wouldn't get into the car. And they tried to push him in. They tried to pull him in. Did not work. And because he was such a big guy. And he actually went to the ground himself. So they were like, okay, we have no alternative. We got to hold him on the ground. Now, before they even put him to the ground, they asked him, have you been taking anything? Because he was acting erratic. And he obviously had he was kind of foaming at the mouth, and he was saying that he had breathing problems before he even went to the ground. And so those are red flags for police officers to basically say, hey, this guy's under the influence of something, and he might be overdosing. So they called the ambulance for George Floyd before he even went to the ground. Now, just so you know, the dynamics of ambulances, they take time. They take time to get to a situation. Okay, so it takes like 10, 15 minutes for an ambulance to arrive. And that's just the way it is. There's traffic, they don't instantly appear. They take time to get there. So they took George Floyd to the ground, and the position that they had him in looked bad. If you record it from one angle, it looks bad. It looks like the knee is on the neck. Now, just so you know a little bit about me, I'm a judo expert. I'm a 3rd degree black belt. And the move that they used on George Floyd, I'm aware of. Okay? It is a floating knee. Okay? So it's a hold where you actually put the weight on the back of the person. Okay? And the knee that looked like it was on George Floyd's neck is a floating knee. So basically the way it works is here's the knee, and here's George Floyd's head. So George Floyd's head won't go any higher than the knee, but it's not getting pressured down. Like, it's not like the knee is pushing it down. It's just floating. And so it'll look like this in the video, but basically the head can move up and down. That's important to understand. So the knee is not acting as a pressure down on the neck, but it is preventing the head and neck from going up. That's important because it's basically a way of restraining the person from getting up. And that's really important, especially when you're dealing with somebody who is possibly overdosing. And one of the things is they tilt the head a certain direction in order to prevent breathing issues. That was really important because if you have breathing issues, like you don't put the face down because then the guy can't breathe. You tilt the head, and that was another thing that the police officer did to try to mitigate any potential death situation. They were actually trying to protect George Floyd's life. Now, the way the video looks, it looks like, the knee's on the neck, and he's being pressured onto the ground. And he's saying he can't breathe. Well, if you say you can't breathe, you can breathe. You can only speak if you can breathe. It's just a basic physics thing. Anatomy thing. You can't speak unless you can breathe. And as a judo guy, I know that if you put pressure on the neck, like if you meet me and I do like some judo on you, and I put pressure on your neck, I can knock you out within 3 seconds. So it's like that. I will, and I've done it many times in competition where I knocked the guy out. He was out. And they had to wake the person up. Because in judo competitions, one of the things we do is we choke people. And a choke in judo is a blood choke, where you basically block either side here. And you can knock somebody out very, very quickly. So the fact is, he was down on the ground for about 9 minutes. And if there was any pressure on the neck, he would have been out much, much quicker. He would have been out, as I said, 3 seconds. And if there was an air choke, which is the other possibility, what will happen is usually it takes, and the reason we don't use air chokes in judo is generally it's slow. You gotta knock your opponent out as quickly as possible, so you don't use an air choke. Air chokes, usually it's 1 to 2 minutes before the guy will pass out. So generally what you do is use a blood choke in judo. So air choke, maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes max if you have good lung capacity. And George Floyd did not have that. He was actually just recovering from COVID. He was actually COVID positive at the time. So his lung capacity was reduced. So if there was any air choke, he would have been knocked out, again, probably within a minute. That was not the case. The autopsy, which I read, there was actually 2 autopsies, and I'll get into that. There was original coroner's autopsy, which was done within 24 hours. The autopsy actually stated that there was no air or blood choke applied, and there was no evidence that that was the cause of death. The autopsy did show that there was 3 times the lethal dose of fentanyl in George Floyd's system. And that is what caused the death of George Floyd, that he had heart problems. It was considered a homicide by the coroner, but that is a misnomer. So anytime there's a person present at your death that is connected to you, like either like holding you or like involved with you while you're dying, that is a homicide. It's not that that person murdered you. It is that it's a homicide. It's just the definition for police. So that's one of those misnomers that kind of got out, and people are like, oh, the coroner said it's homicide. Well, no, they are saying that it's not that the police officer murdered this person. He was just there at the time of death. And that's really important to understand. Now, there was a second autopsy that was performed as well, and I read that one as well. And the problem with it, it was done several days after George Floyd had died. Now, what ends up happening is any bruising or any evidence that would show a blood or air choke would be gone by that point. Just the way the decay and the way the bodies work, you just wouldn't be able to detect those things after a few days. So what ended up happening was the coroner was working for the plaintiff in this case, the family, and they were kind of biased, obviously. So they basically said, well, we can't really see it, but we believe that there was this air, or that there was weight on the neck and blah blah blah, even though the original autopsy showed that there was not. And that was the more accurate of the 2 autopsies. So that's the first part. The other thing was George Floyd didn't die at the scene. He actually died at the hospital, I believe, either in the ambulance or at the hospital. So that is important to understand. So he was not dead at the scene. And as I said, he did die of a fentanyl overdose. He could say COVID if you really want. But I think it was a fentanyl overdose because he had, as I said, he had ingested 3 times the lethal dose of fentanyl. And he actually, that was just one of the various drugs that were in his system. He had actually multiple drugs in his system that any one of them could have caused his death. So it was probably an overdose death. Now, back to wokeism. So that was really, like, I wanted to get into all the details just so you understand the situation. So wokeism, how do they interpret that situation? Well, white cop, racism. He's an oppressor. George Floyd is black, oppressed. Therefore, racist cops kill black man. And that is the narrative that they push. And what ends up happening is people, they don't do the investigation. They don't read the research. And they don't understand the full context. They don't see the body cam from the police officer, which shows the angle where you can see that the knee is floating. They say, oh, this cop, he had a vendetta. He was just trying to kill that black man. He is evil. And that is the narrative that gets pushed. And, you know, people go, oh, cops are just going around killing black people. Not true. It is just not true. 18 people out of 10 million arrests that happened in the United States last year, 18 unarmed black men died. And of those 18, probably 99% of them were like, probably merited, you know, the police ending their lives because they either grabbed the gun or they grabbed the taser or they did something where they basically asked to be killed, or basically resulted in their own death because they were putting the police officer's life at risk. And that's really important to understand. Just because they say unarmed does not mean that these people are not dangerous. And the problem with wokeism and woke culture is they push the false narrative that police are going around killing black people. And what does that do? It creates these movements where they defund police. So I said 18 people died, 18 unarmed black men died from police. Well, what ended up happening because of all these woke movements was there was a movement for defund the police. And it did happen. They actually, in several major cities, they defunded the police. And the police were also, because of what happened with George Floyd, very afraid of taking action against any black people. So much so that they actually did a study. It was actually, I'd like to find the link and give it to you, but I don't have it handy. There's actually a study where they were checking how quickly the, like, you know, on those shooting things where you have like a suspect come out and you have to shoot the suspect really quickly, and it's just like a practice thing that police will do. Well, if the suspect is black or the suspect is white, there's actually a difference in the rate at which a police will shoot that target. And it's slightly slower for a black person. I think like 20% or 10% slower. It's significantly slower. And it's because they have this fear of, because of all this media attention that has happened, of actually taking action against a black person. So blacks are less likely, even though they have more interactions with police than other races, are less likely to get shot. And it's actually by a factor of 2 times that they're less likely to get shot than other groups. And it's just because of all this hype around, racism, blah, blah, blah. And it's just a false narrative. So what ends up happening, though, is police are less likely to react against black criminals, and they're less likely to be funded to actually go and be able to do anything about it. And there was actually somebody that calculated based on the increase in homicides. So there was actually a result. So they defunded the police for a year. All these things happened, basically reduced policing as a result. And they looked at the numbers. Homicides increased by a significant percentage. And it actually resulted in about 10,000 black people dying in 1 year. In 1 year. So this is the kind of thing that happens with woke culture. It has a good idea, potentially, let's let's try to fight against oppression and blah, blah, blah. But the end result is often bad, and it's based on false assumptions. It's based on the fact that they think that there's this oppression that's going on, but it is not going on. And a lot of the time they assume, like, if you want to see racism, you will see it, regardless of it being there or not. Because you'll actually have like a bias, a mental bias, when you see things with sort of special glasses on where you see racism. You will actually see it when it's not even there. And that's what I see. That's what happens a lot nowadays. Is the media will push it, these woke activists will push it, and often it hurts the very people that it's trying to help. So that was my rant. I know that's why I said, hey, this is going to be controversial. I wanted to kind of explain my side of the story. I actually welcome Thunder God to actually, if he wants to speak to me, I'm open to speak to him, like, over the phone or whatever, and, answer any questions about politics or about the problems with woke culture. I didn't even get into how they ruin comics, but I wanted to give you a real example, and a real example of how it failed. And if you look back to the George Floyd thing just quickly, there was no racism there. It wasn't like they were doing everything based on the police handbook. They were following procedure. They were trying to do everything to save the guy's life, and there was no racism there. Like, even if you look at all the charging documents against Derek Chauvin, there was nothing where they claimed that he was acting in a racist way. However, the woke mob will generally push this notion that there was racism, and there wasn't. So it's very sad, and I really do see it as a problem within our society, that we have this woke ideology that is being very toxic and hurting our society. And just to give the point of Morgan Freeman, he said very famously that if you want to end racism, stop talking about it. And I think that's a very good thing, because often when we talk about things and we talk about them as being a problem, that narrative just of calling something a problem ends up creating that very problem. And just that sometimes race relations were actually better when we didn't have all this wokeism. People got along a lot better. So I just see it as such a negative thing. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope if you stayed all this way and listened to my rant about wokeism, that you enjoyed it and you didn't unsubscribe to me, because it's just my opinion. And you can either agree with me or disagree with me, and you can put it in the comments below. But it's fine. One of the things that will further the conversation, if you really want to go that way, is to, listen to the other side. And, I'm always open to hear how I'm wrong, if I'm wrong. But in this case, I'm not. So hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm trying not to cough. And thanks for watching. Bye for now.